Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lats for this week's live Q&A and news update. Not too much in the world of news to discuss, but we're going to talk about all of the stories that have kind of broke over the last week, including Sigourney Weaver now being possibly eyed for a role in the Mandalorian and Grogu film. We also have a couple bits of little information from a new Jedi Order with Rey's Kyber Crystal, Yellow Kyber Crystal, now being sold at Disney parks through the Jedi Holocron that you can get. It used to be in frame. It's over on the side. You can put it in and hear her talk about certain things, and some of them are post Rise of Skywalker, so that's kind of interesting. We also have comments from Pablo Hidalgo saying Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of George Lucas's favorite Star Wars shows that they've made. And then finally, it is George Lucas's birthday, so we want to wish him a happy birthday. He turns 80 today, which is awesome for him. I'm glad he's doing so well. Obviously, a massive figure in both of our lives and all of your lives, probably watching this. So we couldn't be here without him, obviously. And so we're thankful every single day for George and the work he has done in cinema, because he's really made a lot of our interest in film and television and the art form of cinema. So a happy birthday to George Lucas. We hope you're having a great day, probably spending it watching Star Wars Lads. But if you're not, for some reason, which would be shocking, he hopefully is spending time with his family and having a nice day. So with that out of the way, this is a live Q&A as well on top of our news show. So we're going to be running down our topics, but if you guys send in your questions, comments, theories, anything you want to discuss, non-Star Wars related stuff. We did have some fun conversations last week about movies coming out this year, our favorite movies of the year, our most anticipated movies of the year that was brought up in a chat, anything like that, anything you want to know from us. This is an Ask Us Anything live Q&A. So send it into the chat. We will get to it as we run down these stories. And if you have a comment specifically about the stories, we'll bring it into our discussion about the news topics of the day. So we're going to run here for about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the flow of the stream and the chat. A little less news this week, so it might be a little shorter stream. So get those questions in. And if you want to make sure you get in a question, you can send in a super chat. It helps the channel out, and it boosts your question up to the top, so we make sure we get to it if there are a lot of questions being piled up and it looks like we might not get to one. So you can do that to support the channel, and we greatly appreciate that. Another way you can support the channel is to hit the like button. There are currently more people watching than have liked the video. Make sure you hit that like button. It helps us out so much with the algorithm, helps us get more Star Wars fans in here so we can all talk Star Wars and discuss the thing we love. And of course, if you're watching on replay after the live is over, join us every week for a live. We do let you know when it goes up. We've had some conflicts the last couple Wednesdays. We were doing Wednesdays before, so this week is Tuesday. Last week, Thursday, didn't seem to work for you all, so we switched it to Tuesday. Hopefully this works better. Let us know in the chat too, or in the comment section if Tuesday or Wednesday works better for you guys, because those will probably be amongst the best days for us as well to do these streams. And then when Acolyte comes out, we'll go back to probably Tuesday nights to talk about the latest episode of Acolyte. And then subscribe to the channel if you're new, because we have lots of great stuff coming out. We did just release a tier list. If you haven't checked it out, Star Wars eras rankings. So if you want to see our thoughts on every single era of Star Wars, you can check out that tier list. It is up on the channel. We also had our Skywalker Saga Marathon. That's what I was thinking of earlier. Our vlog that we made when we were at the Star Wars Skywalker Saga Marathon on May the 4th. You can check that video out as well on the channel. And then we've had reviews in the past week as well for Tales of the Empire and the Acolyte trailer number 2 reaction we had out too. So check all that stuff out. We do have a video coming out, for all of you who watch these lives. One of the most popular topics when we were doing Bad Batch lives was what's next for the Star Wars animation. That video will be coming out in the next couple days. I have a theory video about that the next show, so keep an eye out for that, as well as a Star Wars Legends timeline is starting, where I'm going to be breaking down every single era of Star Wars Legends, everything you can possibly watch, read, play, or consume, really, in all eras of Star Wars Legends. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be, I think, an 8-part series covering each of the eras, and then eventually one giant super video that's probably going to be about 2 hours. So check that stuff out. And without further ado, let's get into the first thing, which I think obviously the biggest thing that broke this week. And it is from a lot of the major trades in Hollywood, so it is pretty reliable information. And that is that Sigourney Weaver is being eyed for a role in The Mandalorian and Grogu, directed by Jon Favreau. This is going to be our first Star Wars movie since The Rise of Skywalker in 2019, and it's supposed to come out in 2026. So 7 years between Star Wars movies and theaters, which is kind of crazy. But Sigourney Weaver being eyed for a role, Sonic, what do you think she could possibly be playing maybe in The Mandalorian and Grogu?
I mean, anything and everything, right? She is a sci-fi icon. Obviously Alien was like her first real break, but she's got so many great films over the years. I think it's what is that one Star Trek parody film? I always forget that
Oh,
one. Uh,
yeah, Galaxy Quest.
Galaxy. I was about to say Quantum Quest, but I'm like that's like a TV show or something. But yeah,
Yeah,
no, like
great
things
movie.
that you don't necessarily expect her to pop up in because of her stature, she still does. She doesn't need Star Wars. She's bigger than Star Wars in a lot of ways. She's one of the few people in sci-fi that you could say is like, yeah, okay, like Sigourney Weaver, Star Wars right now. And I would honestly be like, that's fair. So I don't know. For me, the fact that they've mentioned in the trades that it'll be a significant role, it kind of does like kind of push away some of the more underground roles to me. Like I don't see her necessarily being like a new guild leader or anything.
Mhm.
Just to be like, okay, we've lost Carl Weathers, right? Unfortunately, and now we can kind of go back to like the Mando season 1 and 2 vibes where he's leading the guild again. And oh, but we're gonna do with Sigourney. I don't think they do something like that. I know familiarity is definitely something I expect to see a little bit out of this film, especially at the start of the film. But to bring her in, I would say I'd hope to see her in something in the New Republic Navy or the New Republic politics in the political arena. Someone who's obviously on Hosnian Prime or something. I'd love to see that. But at the same time, I would also love to see her become like a villain, maybe become like a canon version of
Yeah.
some grand admirals, right, that are like sticking around here. Natasha Dalla, maybe age her up a little bit from what she was in
Yeah.
Legends at this point. I think that'd be great. It really does come down to how much does she want to like stay involved in Star Wars moving forward? Like, is this something where she's in this film, maybe pops up in some of the shows, and then she's in the finale film, and that's it, or is she in it for the long haul? As long as her character's around, and you can write about it and all that. I don't know. I think that is where the question still kind of remains. Is this like a glorified cameo that's really significant for this film, or is this another classic example of Favreau getting a big name but then completely like pulling the rug out from underneath us, right?
Yeah.
Like in Mando season 3, it was like, oh my god, we're gonna get like a Jar Sabayat with Christopher Lloyd. It's like, nope, he's
Yeah.
just a separatist sympathizer who loves Count Dooku, right? Which I feel like with a movie budget, you can't get away with that. If you're gonna bring this out, if you're gonna put in the trades, it's got to be someone who's at least a power player for, let's say, at least a year in this galaxy. Which, with my reasoning, I think you have to either put it as Imperial Remnant under Thrawn or alongside Thrawn, or someone actively working and dealing with the repercussions of our heroes in the New Republic. So those would be like the two arenas that I would want her to be in. She could just end up becoming like a Mandalorian or something, and I'd be like, all right, why
Yeah.
not? But I don't know.
Could be cool too.
I find she's got such great dramatic chops that I don't necessarily need to see her in something like very physically demanding.
Right. Yeah, that could be cool too, like the armorer's sister. um, I would want to see her face though. If you're getting somebody like Sigourney Weaver, obviously you'd want to see her. And so I was gonna go that exact same route, Legends. Like I when I heard her in a big role, my first thoughts were Dala or Isard.
Yeah,
And
Izar
so
would be good. Yeah.
that would be awesome. I think we've heard in the Mandalorian season 3, one of the things that season did set up with both the Shadow Council and the way this season ends is that they're going to be hunting down warlords, basically. That's kind of the top bounties out there for bounty hunters, hunting down Imperial warlords. And what better way to do it than have some kind of brand new warlord that you bring in. I kind of don't see them bringing an exact character from Legends, to be honest, but I think maybe someone in the spirit of Isard or Dala. Dala is not a warlord per se though. She's more traditional in terms of her Imperial structure, and she kind of works within the confines of what the Imperial Remnant was at the time. So if we go that route, like some type of admiral, I think we could see Sigourney Weaver play that role. And Dala was also a little older, so that kind of fits the age of Sigourney Weaver, kind of that same age profile for both characters. Where Isard, she was younger, but she also, her story would take place a little closer to Return of the Jedi than Mandalorian does. So you could age her up a little bit and then have Sigourney Weaver play her, give her the white streak through her hair, Palpatine's ex-lover, and also, just kind of the most ruthless person in the galaxy who's
You
poisoning
say
people and doing
Palpatine's
crazy things.
ex-lover, or do you mean
Yeah.
uh, Tarkin,
Tarkin,
right?
Dala's with Tarkin.
Yeah,
There's
I was
rumors
like,
about Isard with Palpatine. That's the rumors in the
that's
books.
the one. Yeah, that's true. Okay, I
So
was getting a little mixed up there.
yeah, so you could do something like that, bring it all full circle. I think any way you do that would be interesting. I feel like it is more likely a villain role than anything, considering we kind of separated a bit of the New Republic from the Mandalorian in this last season. Although, most likely there's going to be a lot of backtracking because I doubt season 3 ended with the Mandalorian Grogu movie in mind. So there's going to be backtracking on some arcs in order to bring in the wider world. I think a lot of this also hinges on whether the end of Ahsoka, when like Thrawn shows up at Dathomir, does that happen? Is that a bit of a time jump from where Mandalorian season 3 ended? Does Ahsoka span a little bit longer period of time than we originally thought? Does Ahsoka take place a year after Mandalorian season 3, and this is kind of in between the beginning of Ahsoka and the end of Ahsoka? I think a lot of that comes to play because it would be weird for Thrawn to be back. Ezra's now back to their alert for Thrawn. It would be weird for him to be back and then suddenly have some type of warlord appear who has her own agenda and like is not really following what Thrawn wants her to do. Maybe she's sent out by Thrawn, and that's our way to bring Thrawn into the story. But a lot of the Imperial warlords and legends really act on their own accord. So I would like to see kind of her as this rogue agent, basically, kind of a first stepping stone for Thrawn in for us as movie audiences, as we build up to Thrawn. We talked in the past about, Thrawn appearing in The Mandalorian and Grogu as kind of that Thanos end, where it's just like you see him turn, you see the red eyes, and half the audience, or probably 80% of the audience, is like, who is that? And they start doing all this research about who Grand Admiral Thrawn is and what is the new villain in Star Wars. I think that type of thing would work for this story. So I think villain would be very cool. It'd also be different because she usually plays heroes. So that would be kind of cool, kind of a different twist. But I do think New Republic, some type of New Republic, maybe a senator, some type of aged, veteran general who's
Mhm.
kind of fed up with the fight type of thing, not ready to be in the pacifist government of the New Republic. That type of character I could see from her because she's such a badass. She always plays that type of character where she's like, ready to fight. I don't want to see her as some like pacifist uh senator who's like, you guys can't go fight Thrawn, you shouldn't do that. So hopefully they don't do that, but a lot of cool possibilities. Let us know what you guys think in the chat about Sigourney Weaver joining Star Wars now, making that connection from Alien all the way to Star Wars across the last 45 years now. Alien's 45th anniversary this year.
Yeah, oh, boy.
One of my favorite movies of all time. So let us know what you guys think. And hello there to Skywalker's Academy and K-Pop Times who have joined us in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you guys enjoy the stream as well as the rest of you watching. But yeah, Sigourney Weaver is a surprise to be sure, but definitely a welcome one. Let's move on to the next story here, which we're going to talk about George Lucas. It is his birthday at the beginning and wished him a happy birthday. And we also have the kind of news that Obi-Wan's one of his favorite shows. This obviously is, second, third hand. It's like Pablo, if you listen to the interview, Pablo Hidalgo's like, somebody told me that George Lucas loved Obi-Wan Kenobi. So it is third hand at best, this information. But there are rumors out there that Obi-Wan Kenobi is one of George's favorite Star Wars shows that's been put out under Disney. Look, I could see him enjoying it. Obviously, he lived and died with the prequels, right? George had that transition into Disney, selling Star Wars to Disney, because of the hate out there for the prequels, and he doubled down on it. Obviously, what did he do after the prequels were over? Clone Wars, more prequel stories. He didn't want to jump into the original trilogy or just try to put stuff out that would make the fandom come back to him. He doubled down on his creative pursuits, and I really appreciated that. But uh, if he hadn't stuck with the prequels, then I could see this being something that he didn't necessarily love, but I think he loves prequel stories. He loves seeing Hayden and Ewan get their due. It kind of makes a little sense that he would like this show a lot. Although, I don't necessarily buy that it's his all-time favorite Star Wars show or whatever a lot of people are trying to spin this as. But what do you think, Cynic?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that interview. It is very loose to say like, oh yes, that's the one. That's what he's thinking about and loves so much. And it's like, does he? Like, I don't know. I think he'd be someone who'd really appreciate Andor, if anything, because so much of his original philosophy for the rebels versus the Empire, like even in a recent interview with James Cameron, is like, yeah, back in my day, it was the Viet Cong. That's who I was trying to show, and the Empire was the United States, right? Which is like a very, very progressive idea. It is like almost anarchist in some ways, but people don't pick up on that because at the same time, he pairs it with the Campbell storytelling of the mythical hero and that hero's quest, and he takes a lot of imagery from Nazi Germany, from these
Mhm.
historic things that had already happened, that are already 30 something years in the past for people, mixed in with some Flash Gordon aesthetic. And at that point, it's its own thing. And it grew into its own thing. So when I see the journey that he's been on, all the way from the original concept into where he is by the time he lets go of the company and gives it over to Disney, makes that sale, I would say like his comments too, with like the Force Awakens being like, it's not the most original thing. It doesn't push it as
Yeah.
technologically as I would have done it, which I think that's 100% one of the biggest criticisms I will have for that film. If I do enjoy it, it's just like I didn't see anything new or like amazing or shocking, which is why it feels like the volume was so heavily praised during that initial promo for Mandalorian season 1 and 2, because it was just
Hmm.
such a new technology and so interactive. But then he said he loved The Last Jedi for being so unique and taking Star Wars in a very interesting place. And he is someone I think who always wants something new. He doesn't necessarily have to love or like it, but when he sees something that it's not already like what he's done, I think he's gonna appreciate that. So
Right.
in a way, I would say Andor would be the one that I believe in. But then Kenobi, I think, comes down to the fact that I mean these are some of his original characters. He had some extra consulting done for it, right? Like they were asking him, does it make sense? Is it okay for us to put this battle in between 3 and 4? And he was like, yeah, no, I'm all for it. And apparently he gave a little bit of advice and little tips there. He was there on set a couple of times. It seems compared to the other shows, his involvement was a little higher. And I think especially during COVID with the limitations that Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi probably faced, having him at least be there, his presence probably was a little reassuring. So
Yeah.
I think both of us like that show quite a bit still. And we can still call out its flaws, especially visually. But if there was a show that you're gonna love, right? I would say Andor, but then sometimes when you get to work on something, that's always gonna supersede it. So I think it comes from that angle where it's like, yeah, I mean, this is something that was implanted in my ideas of Star Wars from the pre drafts, and now I'm like bringing it back. I'm getting be able to like see it played out by people who are pursuing and my legacy and furthering it along, and I get to at least have a couple of says here and there, and I think that's why he's a fan. Um,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, though, I don't believe it's his favorite. I just think that's maybe one of his more beloved ones because he's type of guy to do some of the more quirkier picks, right? Like the Clone Wars, his favorite one is with um the droid
Yeah.
the D Squad
D
episodes.
Squad.
Yeah, and no one really says like, oh my god. Like if anything, people are like complaining about that are quite a bit when it first came out. But he's like, no, that's what I love, right? So George picking something that is not the mainstream or well accepted makes a lot of sense to me too. So
Yeah.
the combination of having worked on a little bit, I think it all makes sense.
Yeah, that's the main point I was going to go with is he never picks the things that everybody else likes. He
Yeah,
purposely, because of how jaded I'm sure he is from the way he was treated for what, 12 years before he sold the company, 13 years. He I think likes to go against what everybody else does because he's just like, at this point, I'm just gonna like try to bait everybody into getting mad now. But I do think he likes certain things. He likes. I feel like he probably likes what we liked about it, right? And that's
yeah,
almost everyone likes the fact that we saw Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen again. It's not the best show. It doesn't have the most cohesive writing or narrative, but at least we got to see those characters on the screen again. Yeah, I wish it was better and parts. Some parts were excellent, but I do think he likes the spectacle. That's what he went for with his lightsaber duels. The sequel trilogy doesn't necessarily go for that same spectacle. I think he likes that spectacle. I think he likes seeing the redemption for these actors who I'm sure he has a lot of love and affection for. So I think in all that, I'm sure he enjoyed getting to see, all of that come together. But I would imagine the story is not necessarily one he probably would have touched if he was working on Star Wars. But you know, to each their own. If he did actually truly love it, we'll never really know. But if he did actually truly love it, then I'm glad he did, because I'm certainly one who ranks that in, kind of the middle to upper tier of Disney Star Wars shows. Like, there's a lot of things I really don't like about it, but there's also a lot of things I really love. And I love Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's my favorite Star Wars character, so always going to have a soft spot for that. In the chat, we have Skywalker's Academy, who says it's amazing how many people believe Lucasfilm threw away George's scripts. Yeah, they didn't use them verbatim, but they started the sequel trilogy with his ideas, and they are the seed of the trilogy. They are, and it's
yeah,
not necessarily something that I think either of the second or third movies in the trilogy followed at all. But The Force Awakens was kind of built originally around it. I do think a part of the studio mandate for it was, and probably one of the reasons why Michael Arndt left the project after finishing a couple drafts of the script, was the fact that he was following George's ideas a bit closer. And I think they decided, people hate the prequels. Let's not make it anything like the prequels. Let's really try to make it something that feels like the spirit of the original trilogy. By doing that, did they step a lot on the original trilogy story? Yes. But I think that was the goal at the time. And I always try to remind people on this channel, we can't remove ourselves from 2015, the zeitgeist of 2015 for Star Wars fans. People hated the prequels still. It was not a safe time to be a prequel fan unless you were making fun of them. Nobody wanted to see that. Everybody wanted to see what we got with The Force Awakens. Sure, fans like us who grew up with the prequels, I think we were all hoping for a little bit more than we got with The Force Awakens, something a bit fresh, a bit new, but it doesn't change the fact that seeing Han Solo, Princess Leia, even Luke Skywalker for 2 seconds on the screen felt exciting, and the spirit of the original trilogy felt like it was back. And that's what they were really going for. And really, if you look at Force Awakens too, people I think are fed up with it more today because of how much Hollywood jumped on that trend after The Force Awakens of these
yeah.
sequel reboots. But really, The Force Awakens was one of the first ever. You had Jurassic World, Creed, and Force Awakens all in the same year. And
Wow.
so I think after that, then you started seeing that trend start to continue because all three of those movies made so much money. And that's when people kind of got sick of it. So I think that's a fair way to look at it, Skywalker's Academy. Definitely good ideas there.
And I want to build on that final point there of all three. I didn't even realize all three were that was a pretty solid year for legacy
Yeah.
franchises kind of coming back. But of the three, the one that is probably the best to recognize now is Creed, because it
Yep.
makes that effort of taking that original sentiment, the original thinking, beliefs, the script, the ideas, and then examines it in its story and then pushes forward with its own. And yeah, it's not I won't ever call Creed like a incredible story. I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty solid. It's more about the characters and
Mm-hmm.
reckoning of some of its themes more than it is about like, oh wow, there's it's a big movie with such big changes for the Rocky franchise with a boxer, unproven, untested, that's winning it out and are losing in their first match, major match. Right? it is Rocky, but with the son of Creed, right? That is basically
Yeah,
how you can dumb it down.
it's like
But
reverse Rocky, where instead of
yeah,
him being like poor on down on his luck in the streets, he's a rich kid, son of a famous boxer, comes
yeah.
in.
And it's great in that sense that it takes its time to examine its legacy and all that. But I won't say what Coogler did in that film is what's present in Creed 3, right? Like they're fun popcorn flicks. But of the three, I would say that it's the one that's aged the best on its own because it's at least got some stronger, richer
Right.
themes. And I'm not trying to like bash on The Force Awakens, but it is very clear that Disney was trying to go away from feelings of the prequels, the feelings of whatever George's Star Wars was like, just trying to going back to the original 70s and 80s Star Wars, right? And I think it's also important to point out the fandom around the prequels. Like when you see people online say like, "Oh, it was just a very loud vocal minority," that's not true. That absolutely hated these films. It's absolutely not true. You can still find all of these archived forums where people are just raging about every detail after they see the movie, right? It's not like you can't find evidence, and it feels like sometimes people are rewriting that sentiment. And you can look at something as late or early, depending on your perspective. And with the prequel trilogy, there was a film called The People versus George Lucas in 2010. I think Revenge of the Fanboys was from 2009. It's got some very disgusting plot lines in there, but that's how people were. Like people were so adamant that George Lucas ruined their childhoods, ruined their lives in a sense. And it's like, okay, if you're Disney, if you've just made this major multi-billion-dollar deal, are you gonna go play it super safe and do something that people want more of, that they've been all clamoring for supposedly? Or are you gonna be like, let's go with the microbiotic world that George has in some of his drafts? Like, no, you're not. You're gonna do something that harkens to what you already know and then take some initial steps, right? So it makes a lot of sense. And I think the things that survive the most in the sequel trilogy that are still present in the current ones from Lucas's drafts are probably the idea that Luke is on an island alone, that he's going to train this young girl. Some of those ideas, I think, definitely propagate themselves in The Last Jedi. How they play out, probably not at all what Lucas was going for or planning. But I can't entirely blame Disney, but at the same time, now with hindsight, it's like I do wish they pushed it a little further, especially with
Mm.
the fact that one of the biggest criticisms that shouldn't have been a criticism, it's just more about the execution as opposed to the idea itself, was people were complaining so much about the politics of the prequels. But if you're gonna have a new republic be your setting and then you're gonna destroy it, you gotta at least understand some of the politics. You have to understand some of like where the galaxy is. Rebel fighters can only give you so much of a perspective, especially if you've seen that Rebel Alliance grow into something bigger and bigger in the original trilogy. So what is the end result? We don't ever get to see that in The Force Awakens. And that's a bummer, but people were genuinely clamoring, hating on every Padme scene, hating on everything. But now they meme it. They're like, those are such fun lines. We've got our Dello Feligates, right? Like, and it's great. It's fun. It's awesome now. It's important too. But just a decade ago, people were not feeling those sentiments. So, I hope moving forward, Star Wars doesn't necessarily fall for that same trap of like, oh, people are enraged. I mean, we've already seen it already with The Rise of Skywalker. As much as we love the lore of that, both of us, it's not like I'm going to say it's a incredible film or anything. It definitely takes some corporate mandates and trackbacks. It kind of does the same thing that Disney started off with. Instead of pushing forward from that safer spot, it reverted in so many ways. So the only thing we can hope for now is this future is going to be fresh and new, and it's gonna be the Star Wars that we saw under George, that was weird, was interesting, and that didn't always land, but you could always appreciate there was something to be mined from it endlessly.
Absolutely. And the funny thing too is like they shot scenes with the politics in The Force Awakens and they cut them.
Yeah, A whole
because you
character
can
is
watch them.
missing in the film. You just
Yeah,
see her die.
Corstella. Yeah, she's a big part of the Bloodline book too, and
Yeah.
she dies, on screen, but her whole story is off screen, and that sets up a lot of the New Republic. I mean, I always talk about how so many people I knew were absolutely completely lost about what the difference between Resistance and New Republic was when The Force Awakens starts, and like why. Okay, when the New Republic blows up, why are there still Resistance fighters? Like people thought it was all the same thing. So anyway, they didn't do a great job with that, but yeah, we'll answer a couple more here, and then we'll move on to our next topic. But keep sending in those questions, guys. And then Travis Mitchell sent in a super chat. Thank you so much, Travis. We appreciate you, and hello there to you as well. And if you have a question you'd like answered, just send it in. We'll get to your question since you sent in that super chat. So really appreciate that. Thanks so much. And then back to the top here, we have Colton Smith, who says Force Awakens was a prototype Star Wars movie. Ironically, it's easily the best movie in the sequels. I still think that as well, Colton. So I'm glad you and I are on the same page as well. But it's a prototype Star Wars movie. I don't know if I'd say prototype as much as like prototypical, maybe what you were going for. Like it is
A
the
good
classic
template
stuff
film.
of
Yeah.
all of the original trilogy. I still say to everybody, it's all the original trilogy they kind of copied, not just A New Hope. Yeah, it has the Death Star thing, but the Death Star run in Force Awakens is more like Return of the Jedis than it is A New Hope's. And then you have a lot of stuff that really ties in with Return of the Jedi and A New Hope. Maybe not as much Empire Strikes Back in there, but both of those two movies for sure. And then Skywalker's Academy says it has been documented in several articles I read during the time of the commotion. Lucasfilm doesn't throw anything away, especially from the original creator. I think I've left comments how Anakin will be brought back as the father type figure and continue his prophecy. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I think you might be on the money with that whole father thing because it is seeming like it's something that Dave Filoni definitely has a lot of interest in doing. And if there was somebody who was going to continue off of George's original ideas,
Yeah.
it is Dave Filoni. And I agree with you. No movie studio throws things away. Like even a bad script, they keep. They keep everything in case they ever want to go back to it or use it again. Nobody just gets rid of it. So all these studios have things, shelved films. They have shelved films. They have shelved scripts. They have all these things that you've never seen or never heard of that are there. They probably have drafts of George Lucas's scripts from 5, 6, 7, or 5, 6, 1, 2, and 3 that are there in Lucasfilm. You never know what ideas are being hidden in the vaults there. So definitely agree with you.
Yeah, and it's not just that it's Lucas's stuff, right? We look at something like Rebels, it is so inspired by Macquarie's art style. Like entire creature designs, aliens, ships were brought back. And, some people complain it's like it's a little bit too much on the nose, but why not, right? Especially for an animated show, why wouldn't you harken a little bit more, especially 2014 when that show first started? When we look at a lot of the Imperial Super Commandos, the Mandalorian Super Commandos, it goes back to the original Boba Fett art style, right? And they're like, well, this is a great time to use it. So, yeah, Star Wars is probably like the first major franchise that has oh, created so many infrastructural things. Like that's probably the worst way of putting it, but like a way of organizing all your assets and your templates and your history. I think has always been part of a lot of studios, but I don't think anyone ever like made it a big thing into investing for or laying aside a huge amount of budget for. Lucas was always like, I'm pushing money to advancing the next generation of cinema and bringing it as close as possible to today. But at the same time, it was also like, I'm making sure everything we use has a place and is preserved to the best of its ability. Unfortunately, the only thing that's probably not is the original trilogy prints. Hopefully, someday we can find them and we can just see them as close as possible. I know we got Project 4K 77 and 80 and 83 that are like fan designs essentially combining a bunch of prints and all that. And maybe that's the one thing we'll have to live with as Star Wars fans, that we'll maybe never get to see the fully original versions of that. But everything else, Lucas makes sure I'm keeping this. He built Skywalker Ranch. That place is enormous, and it's not just because he wanted a bunch of facilities. He was using all of it at all times. I mean, the original idea of the volume, you can find the original patents for it. It was going to be built on Skywalker Ranch. It was going to be something he would have just like woken up in his house, like rolled out to the street, and like just a mile away, that's where he had been filming, which is, you can't really say that about any American
Right.
or European filmmaker, but he thought about everything. He made it super connected, and he made sure I can find it and pick it up whenever needed.
Yeah, and that was all the perks of not having a public company, right? It was George Lucas. It was his company. It was run by him. Every decision went through him, and that's why it kind of became a storehouse for for ideas in history, because you don't have to outsource things. You didn't Everything was done by him and approved by him. That's the nice thing about running your own company and being the CEO of it and never taking it public, is the fact that it all goes through you. And so, yes, I'm sure there's a lot of crazy things in the vaults of Lucasfilm. We'll move down to Travis here, who sends in a question, for his super chat question. And Travis says part of why the sequels age badly is unlike the prequels, which were often based in story and character. So it was fun. Sequel talk is always behind the scenes, sucking the film out. Sequel talk is like trying to talk about how you love Fat Albert, then someone brings up Bill Cosby as a person, just ruins it. Okay, let me see if I can try to understand what you're saying there. So you're kind of saying that so many things are happening off screen or about things in real life that ruin the sequels, whereas prequels, the story and the characters drive, I would say more character drives the original trilogy, story kind of drives the prequels. And is that kind of what you're alluding to, Travis? Is the fact that so much of the conversation around the sequels that messes with talking about the sequels is kind of the fandom in general, or what's going on behind the scenes with making the films, or what's going on off screen to fill in the story, stuff like that. If I understand you right, I think that's kind of what you're saying.
We can only guess until he says otherwise. Critiques of the prequels are often based in story and character.
Okay.
Sequel talk is behind the scenes.
So you're saying that most of the reason why people hate the sequels is because of Disney and Lucasfilm and the people who work on the movies themselves, kind of more so than the actual filmmaking. I think I think that would make it age better, as that narrative would go away, if that's your argument. Because I think, when you have a bad movie, you have a bad movie, right? It's going to be bad. If it's bad in 2024, it's going to be bad in 2054. It's not going to get any better. Um, and I think that's one of the things about the prequels is they're certainly not the best made films, especially the first two, but they have so many things. I mean, as Star Wars fans, right? They have so many things in them that we love that for us, how do we put it? When you watch Star Wars, right, as an average person, right, let's say the average person has seen Star Wars maybe twice each. Like, that's pretty generous, but twice each. Um, you watch it as a film, start to finish, and most likely you're not watching the next one the next day, or you're not watching the next one anytime near when you watch the last one. When we watch Star Wars, for me, when I watch Star Wars, I'll speak for myself, growing up, it was every day, scenes from it every day when I got home from school. It was watching them nonstop over and over and over again, start to finish. That it's hard to even see them as a complete film. It's like a collection of favorite moments of my life. Like, I know it sounds pretty lame, but just like that's how much I've consumed and watched Star Wars. That's how much I love Star Wars. That it's impossible to take yourself out of different moments of the films for those first six specifically. That's why I think it's easier for me to be more critical on newer shows that are coming out or new films that are coming out, because you're seeing them for the first time with a critical lens versus living and breathing them for years of your life. I think that's why it's so hard to take a step back from the prequels, and I think that's why the prequels are having that resurgence, because so many kids like myself had that experience with them, like and it was almost a new experience that a lot of kids couldn't have with the original trilogy, right? Because VHS didn't really start until the early 80s. So the original Star Wars film you couldn't really watch after it came out. You had to go see it in theaters, or you couldn't really watch it on repeat. Where the sequels, I mean, the prequels, right? We had these DVDs with all the commentary and the behind the scenes and all this stuff that was there for you to consume as much as you want. Scene selection on DVDs, so you could find the scenes you wanted to watch and consume them over and over again. I think a lot of that plays into the obsessiveness of prequel fans.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Prequel fans are obsessive to a degree because, in a lot of ways, they had all of the technology to watch these films, to see how these films were made. Like, I'd say a lot of our interest in filmmaking came from watching those behind the scenes documentaries, especially episode ones is so huge, right? You see, honestly, you see day to day stuff for years of that film, which is not something a major studio ever wants to show. But this was Lucasfilm under George Lucas. He's like, I want to show this to people. I want people to see what I'm doing, right? Even he kind of cut back for Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith because he's like, maybe I went too far in some places, and people were like, yes, you did, George, and they made it known to him, right? So to get to your what we've at least pulled from what you're saying here, Travis. Yeah, I guess you can say like, yeah, people when people talk about The Force Awakens, one person brings up Disney or Catholic Kennedy and makes you want to stop talking about that. Yeah, that's true, right? Like we live in an age where every single show or movie or even books, right? Like things that used to be just absorbed on your own, engaged with by yourself, or just like your close friends and family. Um, they became like almost its own manosphere of like discussion that's never stopping, right? We used to be able to say like, oh, I didn't realize this movie was bad to some people. Now kids grow up, they're already got an iPhone or an iPad in their hands, right? By the time they're 3, I'm sure they're like essentially reading forums or Instagrams and TikToks of just people's comments of what they're saying. When we grew up, we were at that crux point, right? And that's I think another big thing. We had all the technology, we loved it, we were obsessed with it, but we didn't have the technology that was negative quite yet. Like we didn't have the social media access, we didn't have like the same interest as our parents did in older media like news channels and all that. We weren't looking up people's opinions all the time until people were telling it to us, and then we looked it up and found articles or found stuff like that. Nowadays, the way even like fandom websites can be run,
Mhm.
your algorithm defines, oh, you don't like, you typed a couple things, oh, I didn't like this, I didn't like that about this, and you'll be pumped out all that stuff. It becomes almost like an endless self-fulfilling cycle of like, yeah, all these people are saying this is bad, or all these people are saying that this is good, right? I don't think we ever had that same struggle, and a lot of that kind of culture war that's just not in just Star Wars, it's in every fandom, like Lord of the Rings, it's in Harry Potter, it's in everything, right? That all really started with the backlash online on these forums, on these blogs to George Lucas, right? A lot of these ideas that you can say are stronger in the prequel story, I'll agree with you 100% there. But people were raging about hating Christians, and people were raging about Jake Lloyd, about Ahmed Best. They were raging even about Natalie Portman. They were raging about every person, right? The only person who got off relatively unscathed of the entire trilogy is probably Ewan McGregor, right? And look
Mhm.
what happened the moment he stood up for Moses Ingram for Obi-Wan Kenobi even before it premiered, right? They're like, oh, he's being forced to say these things, or like, oh, by responding, it got worse, and then people continued feeding into their cycles of extreme positivity, extreme negativity, right? So when we watch Star Wars as a kid, we never had that. Kids these days don't get to escape from that, and I feel really bad for them because it's hard, especially young girls who identify with Rey. They're never going to be able to escape that, right? There were girls who identified with Leia, who identified with Padme. They definitely heard things around in their real life saying, "Oh, girls can't do this and that," but not necessarily as much with these characters. Now, with the way that these fandoms are and these discussions are, and obviously with the way Disney has handled the publicity and the media around the making of these films, these girls are going to grow up and be like, oh, man, everyone must hate Rey because I'm hearing all these things that are negative about Rey and Daisy Ridley and all that. The same things that we faced and we heard about with Ahmed Best and all these people like feeling like they had an disconnect from Star Wars, disconnect from filmmaking entirely. It happened again in the sequels, right? We had John Boyega face those criticisms. We had Daisy Ridley turn off her Instagram. Kelly Marie Tran was abused online. So I get the idea that like, oh, the sequels are not so great. They're not so. You can say those criticisms, but the idea that they're just purely bad films or that it's because everyone hates them. No, there's a lot more complicated things around them that algorithms, binary code, completely old changes. Like we don't live in a world anymore where our opinions can slowly grow and then be slowly halted. Once it comes out there, it's expansive, it's massive. I mean, you can look at right now. We're on YouTube, everybody. You type up Mike Zero. This guy's for like 10 years has been saying Kathleen Kennedy's being fired, Daisy Ridley and the sequels are being decanonized. All right, and a new big rumor was The Acolyte, which hasn't even come out yet. But most people have not even seen the preview, which looks so much better than that first trailer. But they're saying, oh, it's canceled after season one because someone made a blog post and it got chained to enough people, and bam, that's how it is. So I don't agree 100% with what you're saying, Travis. I agree that there are definitely flaws in the storytelling, like we've pointed out, with the lack of politics, with the lack of grounding of the world. Oftentimes, like you guys are saying, sometimes it feels like we're just retreading on the original films without making advancements, and sometimes to the negative detriment of those. I agree, but any chance of these films growing out and kind of escaping, that was never going to happen because this all started off with the prequels, with the hatred towards George, with all that. It just happened to grow into our technology that people use from an early and earlier age. So the opinions that we have now, they're not just allowed to just be. They're weaponized, they're changed, they're used, and I feel so bad for kids growing up now who don't necessarily even understand that right away. Like it'll take
Right.
years to understand. Like, oh, what I'm saying or doing is being used against me, even though I maybe typed one comment on a video. It just ballooned into something else.
Well, it's hard for people today to even develop their own opinions. They're told so much what to think by, you know, frankly, people like us, but we try to like keep,
Yeah.
in our channel it open for we don't really care what your opinion is. We're happy that you have that opinion
Just be
because
respectful. Yeah.
we and I, or Sonic and I, both have very different opinions on Star Wars, and I think over time, certain things have changed even more and more as we've gone on this channel. We've realized what our avenues are, but it's hard for people today to have an opinion. I was reading some of the comments specifically about this topic, and we'll get to your guys' comments too, but Skywalker Academy was saying, "Oh yeah, I walked out of the theater smiling after all three movies, and then I watched Thor Skywalker and he turned me off against them. I stopped watching him now." But yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is like these people with power, they can convince you of something that you actually don't feel. And that's not what we're trying to do here on the channel is convince you. We might try to, argue our side, but we're never trying to actually make you change your mind. If you like something, you like something. I like a lot of bad movies. I love bad movies. Uh, and the prequels, like Revenge of the Sith, is my favorite movie. It's always been my favorite movie, and that's not going to change. No movie I'm ever going to watch is going to be my favorite movie. That doesn't mean there's two different things between favorite and liking something and having it be one of your favorites or enjoying it and realizing the objective truths about the quality. I can't sit here and ever fight for Revenge of the Sith and not be delusional about it being better than The Godfather, but I will say that it's my favorite movie. It is. So that's what we have to do when we live in today's world, right? Is you have to let things go out your ear through one ear and out the other. If you watch somebody who you don't agree with, turn them off. Don't keep watching them. Don't let
Yeah.
them change your mind. It's your opinion that matters. You can see their points though, and then watch it from a different angle and be like, yeah, I can kind of see where they're coming from. But if you watch it again a year later or a couple months later, and you go, I still really enjoy this movie despite the flaws, that's great. That's, the best thing possible. I
Yeah.
do think One of the things, though, today that I think is useful, and again, this goes back to our conversation about trying to develop your own opinion, is when you go on, right, you buy a movie ticket to Fandango or on Fandango, first thing you see is Rotten Tomato score. You go on IMDb, first thing you see are, the fan score, which, all the people out there, don't look at IMDb fan score. Most of them make no sense. But look at the Metacritic score, which is right next to it. That's the critics. Those are probably a little better score. And or Letterbox, I think, is a much better representation of general movie going fandom. Versus bots and people spamming, which IMDb mostly has. But anyway, yeah, you see critic reviews, right? That's one of the things first telling you, should I see this, should I not? There's culture has obviously changed. People don't go to the movie theater anymore and look at the big board and go, I wonder which movie I should see. There's 3 of them starting at 7 o'clock. They go for a reason. You go to the theater to go see something. You go to the theater to buy a ticket to go watch something that you've already seen what the critic reviews are. And then because you've seen that it's a mediocre movie, even if you go and you thought you were looking forward to it, now you're looking for problems. Now you're looking to hate it. That's not what we used to do.
Yeah.
So the world has completely changed in that regard. And you got to try to avoid that type of stuff if you're going to actually have your own real opinion. There are reasons, though, majority opinion exists because most people feel a certain way. It doesn't mean you have to be different every time, but just make sure it is your opinion and not somebody else's that you're regurgitating, because that's when you really become kind of a lifeless, soulless film goer. You're not actually consuming the product. You're just regurgitating what people are telling you to think about it. And that's what I think is one of the big problems with today's world. But there are a lot of also other positives about conversation like this online about Star Wars, because there's a fine line between religiously going to Star Wars and promoting it even if it's not good, and deciding, I saw it once, I'm not going again, because our money talks. No matter what, our money talks in business. If you don't like something, don't watch it. If you do like something, go watch it a bunch of times. That's what talks. They're gonna think, most studios, most people don't really look at what we're saying on YouTube. They don't look at critic reviews. They just look at, hey, it made money. People like this. And most of the time in today's world, that it does mean people liked it, because movies make 75% of their box office in the first weekend nowadays. And if you're going to see it, for weeks and weeks after that first weekend, it most likely means people watched it. But yeah, to get to more of your guys' comments, because we've definitely been on some rants there. Going back to this conversation, and we'll kind of just run these down. I don't know if we should really comment too much more about a lot of the conversation going on. But let's see, we're really backlogged here. I think it was Colton says, I think the sequels aged poorly because it doesn't build on its own story while also stepping on the original story. I think that was always kind of the issue with the sequels, right? Is like,
Yeah.
how do you handle these legacy characters who we haven't seen for 30 years? And also, how do you build new characters on top of it to start a new franchise? Because these people are 70 and 80 and we're not going to build a franchise on them. So what do we do? They definitely mismanaged it. But I think that was always setting yourself up for a big struggle there.
Yeah, and it kind of comes to the point of, what did people expect to see, right? I know there was a period of time where I expected the EU to be adapted, but even if they were
Yeah.
going to jump 30 years ahead, that would be post New Jedi Order, and you'd have all of these stories, and you're supposed to fit it in here. But the way that Legends, the EU, had evolved, it stopped being multiple individual books or like trilogies and all that. It became one single book series, like Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi. That was it. That was like, that is the total of the story. And then at some point, people came to a realization like, oh, you have to and when I say people, I mean the people who are really. I'm sure there are discussions like, can we keep all this stuff? Is there
Oh yeah.
something we
Oh
can
yeah.
specifically remove, or like write over, or like kind of do in the same way? And you can't. It's just too much. I don't want to be rude here, but it is baggage. And I think a big thing about Lucas was like, he didn't sell that stuff. He's like, yeah, you'll have the commercial rights. You can fill, you can republish all these books and this and that. But he's like, I'm selling you the 6 movies and the Clone Wars. Those are the things I cared about and worked. And even now, right, with these channels like ourselves, right, we can say these things, but you'll go to another channel similarly sized who will say, oh, why didn't we just get the Thrawn trilogy with Luke, Han, and Leia? Okay, now if we had recast them in 2015, there probably would have been a bit more of an uproar than there is now in 2024, right? And then it's like, okay, if we started there, are we just going to continue living in the same space of these characters that have been known for so many people that have already had their stories be told and outlined to such incredible detail and degree? No, right? And then there's people who will say like, oh yeah, no, like there's no way for Star Wars to be better here. This is exactly how it should have been. We don't agree with that either, right? There was flaws structurally by not realizing that, hey, we're so afraid of the outside world, not just Star Wars' internal legacy, but the external legacy, the changes in filmmaking, in studios and for their franchises that, oh, okay, we have to make sure that our story is told well. No, they were just like, let's copy the format of letting a new director come like the original trilogy without realizing that George Lucas was essentially the same director behind the scenes for all 3 of those movies, except for Empire, because that was his direct teacher, Irvin Kershner, that he asked, can you work on it? If you look at the documentary stuff for Return of the Jedi, Marquand was like a relatively small time director. Like he had gotten some nice hits here and there, but he was struggling so much with Return of the Jedi. And Lucas was essentially with the second unit and running the film as a director in so many ways, right? That's why you can oftentimes see in that film some of the blocking's a little bit like not as like dynamic. Sometimes some of the shots, some of the grain of the camera too. They used their first new camera. Like people don't understand that. Like there was a level like it worked out in the original trilogy that Disney automatically assumed if we just follow the same trend here, that should work out, right? But that's not how movie making is anymore. It people weren't complaining every single detail about every minute of a film and having their voice be channeled into these algorithms, into these web pages the same way as they are now, right? People could say all this crazy, they could be like the crazy homeless guy on the street. And then if you're a little kid with your mom walking by, your mom would be like, don't pay attention to them. They're homeless. Now in 2020, that homeless guy can make an Instagram page, get 400, 500 like-minded individuals, repeat that same thing, coalesce into one singular idea, and then that's just going to be jumping into your feed, and you're going to be like, oh, there's 500 people saying that, right? So I
Right.
think Disney also simply misunderstood. We have to at least understand where we are in the world right now, as where franchise filmmaking is, how Star Wars managed to make things work out, where it failed in the prequels, right? I don't think they ever really did. If they did, they would have been like, let's lay out the real true struggle and the deliberate pieces that need to be in play for 7, 8, 9 to be a very clear cut trilogy. The fact that they refuse to release stuff like the behind the scenes, the making of these films, it tells a lot about how much they were like, oh man, we just thought we could do this again because it worked in the 80s, it worked in the early 2000s, but without really ever considering like, hey, that's not how it works out with a big studio like Disney taking over an auteur's lifelong work. It just isn't the case. And now we have to build up the pieces. Now we have to make it work better because Star Wars has always been editing itself. How will that happen? I don't know, but they're trying. I'll give them that.
Well, we've almost reached the hour mark, and that was a good conversation. I mean, we always seem to have some type of conversation about the sequels at some point in our streams, but I do appreciate that. That was a strong, very varied conversation, and there are plenty more comments to get to about that. So we'll try to get to them the best of our ability. We do have a couple more quick hit stories we want to run down real quick before, and so Seneca and I will give our brief responses to these. Again, send in your thoughts on these in the chat and we will get to them as soon as possible. So maybe for the next 5 minutes or so, we'll run down these last few stories and get back to the chat. If you want to make sure you get in a chat, feel free to send in a super chat. Helps us out incredibly with the channel. And always is greatly appreciated. Sends your chat up to the top too. So you make sure to get to your chat. But let's go first with Rey and the new Jedi Order. This was, relatively a nothing story, to be honest, but we got to mention it. A new Jedi Order and Rey being something we're all anticipating, at least seeing what they're going to do with the new Jedi Order. I feel like even people who don't like Rey are interested in seeing what a Star Wars movie looks like finally beyond the Skywalker saga. So they have, if you don't know, grab this. They have these holocron things you can get at Disneyland or Disney World when you go to Galaxy's Edge, and you can put in one of the kyber crystals that you buy if you have a custom lightsaber. If you build your own lightsaber, you can buy a bunch of kyber crystals, turn it any color you want. They just released a yellow one finally, and you can put that in here, and when you turn it up open, it makes some noise. Mine's dead, need to charge it. um, but it makes a bunch of noise, and then you can squeeze the sides and it talks. And I have, the purple one is Mace Windu. I have the blue one, it has Luke. All of those characters are in there. And so yellow, obviously being the only character with live action who has a yellow lightsaber, is Rey. It's a Rey voice, and it talks a lot about some of Rey's reminiscence on the sequel trilogy, more so than anything directly related to New Jedi Order. But some interesting things. Rey doubles down on the idea of being a Skywalker, all the reasonings why she's interested in taking that Skywalker name. She says, Luke Skywalker was my master, so was his sister Leia, and her son Ben gave his life for me. I took the Skywalker name to honor them and their legacy. So that was a big piece of information there on why Rey chose to do that. I mean, I think we all got that from the movie, but uh, there you go, official confirmation. I think the most interesting thing, and this is the only thing that connects to the New Jedi Order, really, is she says Ben was right about letting go of the past, but not about killing it. My task is to make something new, not by killing the past, but by building on all that's good in it. And I really like that line because for me, that hints at possibly moving on from the original prequel and original trilogy ideology of the Jedi back to Star Wars Legends. Jedi can marry, Jedi can have relationships, Jedi can push their power into the future. This promises to me bigger, bolder Jedi Order, different in a lot of ways, but the core of what make the Jedi good. That's something that's really exciting. And hopefully that holds for the movie. This could just be a line they randomly had her say, just to put something in there, obviously. But hopefully that ideology is what they're going for whatever Rey's new Jedi Order is. And maybe we could see, like, Luke as a Force ghost or something in those movies. I kind of doubt it because I feel like they want to move on, but be nice to finally see Luke as a Force ghost.
Yeah, I mean, I think as much as I've liked what I've gotten out of that holocron, right? I feel like I wish I could have heard that right before I walked into the marathon, especially when my brain cells are like falling apart at the very end of like hour 18. Uh, but I think the thing that I'm a little wary about that line because I get the line of thinking there. I think that is what it's ultimately going to play out as, and we've already seen like potential candidates, right? Like I know everyone wants to see Cal Kestis. Everyone was clamoring for Ezra in live action. Now he's got a very legitimate chance of seeing Luke or someone in the next movie or show, right? This has been this discussion in the fandom as a whole, but definitely something we've really emphasized on this channel. Different Boken Jedi ideologies, right? Like the ones that are out in the field who are given what the galaxy has for them, and they're living their lives to their best of their abilities, right? And just from a storytelling perspective, right, it's way more fun to have characters like Cal and Marin be in a relationship than just these monk warriors who are just so stuck with bureaucracy and being perfect servants and all that, right? It's like we get it. That makes sense for the prequels. That's awesome that we can see Acolyte kind of see further that fall, the High Republic, see further into that why they kind of leave that. But that's not what it was when we first started EU, right? We had so many of these characters who were like, oh, I guess I got the Force, or like, oh, my dad was a Jedi, I guess, and
Yeah.
they're like, I'm married with 3 kids. What does that mean? It's like, oh, you can be training, or you can do all these things. So I'm excited for that possibility, and I like that there are definitely a lot of candidates. I mean, there's literally a Corran Horn in canon now. Just
Right.
we haven't really seen him reach the age of being the corn horn that we know from EU. The thing I do worry about though is that mean that it's only going to be something that we see with Rey's new Jedi onward, like let's say the Rise of Skywalker onwards, or are we going to at least see Luke grapple with that? Because I think everyone who is a fan of Luke's story in EU definitely loves it because Mara Jade's such an integral part of his character and how he changes. And I think there are definitely flaws in their storytelling. I don't think they always go to the same dynamic between them as much as they could. It's really just the Zahn books that really get that push and pull really right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if a character who'd benefit from having a female companion or whoever in their life and have that be directly going against what they brought up in and all that, it would be a Mara Jade or a Mara Jade fill-in. And I don't know if we'll get that with some of the wording here. That is what makes me a little concerned. Hopefully, though, this is just something that Luke makes a mistake on or like has some tragedy happen to him and he overcorrects, right? And that's why he's like, nope, I'm going to be the monk and everything, right? Or like disconnected. I hope it's something like that because I come on, man. I want Luke to have happiness in his life just the same way that Leia can train as a Jedi for a year and be like, I still got kids at Han, right? Like that's great.
Yeah. And if they want to turn to Legends, one of the best, obviously, because it was retconning a lot of stuff he did, but one of the best pieces of Star Wars in the early 2000s that kind of grapples with the idea from Attack of the Clones that Jedi can't have relationships, because we forget that like Phantom Menace doesn't even say it. It's Attack of the Clones, so that's the one that puts the stamp on Jedi can't have attachments. Jedi can't have a significant other. And so Survivor's Quest, when that came out right amidst the Attack of the Clones, a lot of that book is really just about trying to grapple with why are Luke and Mara together and why does Luke feel okay with that and how is he moving on from the Jedi of old. And I think bringing in a lot of that philosophy that Zahn has in that book would be good for New Jedi Order if you decide to try to let your Jedi have relationships. And I think they really should, because obviously each one of the movies has a main character who has relationships, right? That's part of the fundamental storytelling block, is having some type of connection between characters. Prequels have Anakin and Padme, for all that's worth. And then the originals have Obi-Wan, Han Solo and Princess Leia. So we were missing that kind of in the sequels. I think that's something else that disconnects you a little bit from characters, is building on those relationships. Finn was the only one who got relationships, and he had a different girl he he was with in every movie. So yeah, I think that would be something ideal. And my hope and my blind optimism for Mara Jade appearing one day is really making me hope that this kind of is leading to something. But we'll see. As Travis pointed out, there was a Kylo Ren toothbrush years ago that said, "Let the past die, and I'll show you the dark side." And there's plenty of toys that say things, and we all think they mean something. This is absolutely a throwaway line. I'm just kind of hoping that since they're using it, and obviously using the word "new," the movie's called New Jedi Order, trying to kind of promote Rey again. They're starting to promote her a bit more. She's appearing more in the parks as well too. We're starting to see her a bit more than we have the last few years, where it's mostly been kind of dominated by the Mandalorian characters. Maybe now they're trying to set a direction at least. All right, a couple quick hits. These will be real fast, and we'll get back to the questions. One that I think is very cool. Ahmed Best wants to be a John Wick Jedi in a Star Wars movie. He wants his character Kellern back to be in a movie that's inspired by John Wick, which, sign me up for that. That would be awesome. I would love to see that. I, love John Wick, seen all 4 of them. I want Ahmed Best to have his redemption. If that means starring in a movie where he plays John Wick as a Jedi, so be it. But that would be very cool.
Yeah, I like Kellern Beck quite a bit, right? So I'd hope that's like the starting ground of like, hey, you've already got a Jedi character. Let's focus on him right now. But yeah, I think it's just a little bit of wishful thinking, especially with where we've seen the story so far. Like he went to Naboo, right? Like
Right.
I would assume he's not just like, I'm gonna drop off Grogu and then like go a different direction and draw the trail, and then he gets that kind of gritty version of the story, right? Maybe that's the best way of doing it. But if it's set on Naboo, it's like I don't know how gritty you can get. That's like one of the nicest places to be during wartime, right? Like it's a very beautiful place. I would hope that gritty means it's like things have gone wrong, and obviously we know him and Grogu at some point have to disconnect, and then then that story can be told. But I would like to at least see why and what's the reason for being on Naboo in the first place with that character before we just see him the next time and he's suddenly like got a beard all grown out and just like raggedy and all that. It's just like, all right, let me at least get the back, like we've been talking about this whole stream. Let's at least get the understanding of the world first before we let these characters do these crazy things.
Yeah, and Ahmed Best is back in the Star Wars fold, not just as Kellern Beck, but he returned for a motion capture role that I don't think we necessarily know exactly what that was for, and he's voicing Darth Jar Jar in that new Lego Star Wars series.
It's for that.
So
They're gonna do a Lego fight with him, and it's gonna be in
that would be
mocap.
interesting. Mocap Lego fight. Yeah, maybe. But he could be appearing as a Gungan or some other type of character again. Maybe Jar Jar Binks. I'd love to see Jar Jar get a little redemption, but yeah, I mean, the screening we went to, right? Phantom Menace, people were dying at Jar
Crazy,
Jar lines. Like, I
crazy.
loved
Yeah,
hearing that. That was awesome. And speaking of the Phantom Menace, it is now officially overtaken The Last Jedi, I think, as the most watched Star Wars film on Disney Plus. Because a couple weeks ago, people were saying The Last Jedi was the most watched Star Wars film on Disney Plus. Now it's the Phantom Menace. I mean, this is kind of a nothing story as well. Obviously, it's the 25th anniversary. If people don't want to go to the theater to watch it, they might watch it at home. It's also Star Wars Episode 1. So if people are getting into Star Wars, more likely than not, they're going to start with this one, even if the original was from 1977. If you know nothing about Star Wars and you just click on Disney Plus, they have the complete timeline on there, and it starts with Phantom Menace. So, not too surprising. Honestly, I've kind of always expected Phantom Menace to be the most watched on there because so many people would start Star Wars, right? Start with this and then drop it. So, makes more sense.
yeah. I mean, episode one. What more can you ask for someone who's just jumping into this universe to go into first?
Yeah, and the last one I wanted to bring up before we get back to you guys' comments is that there's been a bit of information on Outlaws, everybody's most anticipated Star Wars game. But one of the things that was a rumor that came out a couple days ago was that the AI is going to be adaptive. So obviously based on your kind of your notoriety system, I guess, maybe in the galaxy, the conversations with different AI characters change based on things you've done. That sounded kind of interesting. I mean, that's a feature I feel like has been in RPGs for a while. So I'm glad they added it. Doesn't necessarily make me go, oh man, Outlaws is going to be the greatest game ever. But it's a cool little feature, Dad.
It's a bit of a confidence booster, at least that they're trying to be a true AAA title as opposed to like, yeah, we'll take something, especially with a Ubisoft title, like, yeah, we'll just take something that's been worked on perfectly mastered for 5 6 years now and then slap on the Star Wars skin. I
Yeah.
think the different groups in Star Wars in the underworld by necessity make it that you have to have an element of the gameplay be responsive to that, especially with how we've seen it play out in the comics. So, hopefully we get some substantive stuff. Does it feel like just like some PS3 like NPC work? I'd like to feel like, yeah, I'm playing a next gen title. I'm playing a character who, in 2003 when we saw KOTOR, right, I would have expected things to be like 4 or 5 options with Bioware, but now here there's like almost entirely branching like spiderweb like possibilities. That's the only thing I can hope for. Um, but we need to see a little bit more of that game before we really get confident. I think there's like an EA or Ubisoft showing in the
EA
next like
Play.
week or two. EA Play, right? So hopefully
Yeah,
we get to see
probably.
a big
Yeah,
amount
that
there.
what's the we're getting close to what used to be E3. So
Yeah,
Ubisoft's going to have I forgot what theirs is called. Is Ubisoft Connect, something like that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, PS, PlayStation, something. I forgot what it is. Xbox Live Showcase, Nintendo. What's theirs? The Nintendo
Direct.
Direct.
Yeah.
Those we'll start seeing a lot more gaming news soon. But yeah, okay, we'll get back to your questions now, everybody. So we should be doing these questions for the remainder of the show. That's all the news out of the way. If you are interested in joining, we have Skywalker's Academy joined our Rebel tier of our memberships. Thank you so much, Skywalker's Academy. We appreciate you joining our membership program. And for those of you out there who are interested, check out our membership program. We have membership and Patreon programs for all of you to check out, and we greatly appreciate you joining our team here on Star Wars Lads. Scrolling back up to the top, I know, thank you for your patience, Colton. You sent in a comment a long time ago about is there another movie trilogy that is aged as well as the Star Wars prequels? And I was thinking about it a lot. Most of the time I've kind of been sitting here in between conversations, and I really can't think of anything besides what Travis said, which is the Spider-Man trilogy from Raimi. I don't know if that trilogy is aged better, but Spider-Man 3, because of the memes, it has that prequel thing where like it has grown on a lot of people. A lot of people love Spider-Man 3 now because of the memes and because of Bully McGuire. I think that's a pretty good one. I think that's as close as you can kind of get in terms of like fandom redemption from start to where we are now.
Yeah, I wanted to almost be like, there's definitely better trilogies, right? Like, no way we're gonna say Spider-Man, but yeah, in terms of a similar path, I would say for sure that would be I mean, there's a lot of videos coming out with all the Spider-Man re-releases, and the Bully McGuire scene is probably like a reaction I wish I could have like been in theaters for, just to see like everyone's face, like the face of him just being like on the desk and as the camera swivels around, because people are going crazy for that. And I mean, I rewatched every single movie before No Way Home because I was very excited for that. And I, it has gone worse for me, right? And I used to love those films, but I always had problems with three. And I think that was probably because it's coming out right as I was like becoming a little bit more aware of like what movies can be. Um, but like then again, I'll still always love the memes. I always love seeing James Franco in the coffee shop and like the smiles and the smirks and everything there. It's great. It's fun in a lot of ways, but man, one and two, especially two, is such a like buildup of like greatness that three just feels like the floor has been removed underneath it. I'd say it's almost comparable in a lot of ways to how I feel about the sequel trilogy. It feels like at least the Force Awakens and the Last Jedi are building up to something, and then the Rise of Skywalker, you're like, okay, I feel like I missed half a movie here before this happened, but sure, why not? Let's go with it, right? That's how I feel. Plus, also, I don't know if Raimi was ever really a fan of more than 60s Spider-Man, especially with how Venom is very, very 90s Spider-Man. It's just putting him and Sam, and it doesn't work for me. But I think I do get that sentiment of like it has aged as a trilogy better in terms of reception for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, but it's a tough one because there's nothing really like the prequels to where like
Yeah.
the first one not super well critically received when it came out, but the fans loved it until like a couple of years later, and then everybody started hating on the Phantom Menace. And then Attack of the Clones got bombed by critics and fans when it came out. And then Revenge of the Sith was pretty well received critically, but people at that point were just ready to hate anything prequels. So it's kind of a weird arc for the prequel trilogy. And Spider-Man, really, the only one that people didn't love, both critics and fans, when it came out was number 3. So it's even not a direct comparison, but I really can't think of any other trilogy that's grown in the culture zeitgeist. There's been plenty of cult films, but I can't think of anything that's had that same path as the prequels. So I think
I mean,
Spider-Man's our best bet.
maybe the original X-Men trilogy. I know people really don't like Last Stand.
Yeah,
But I haven't really heard people like go like, "Oh man, that film has improved so much for me," or like there's
yeah,
memes of it, right? And I think that's a big thing about like modern, like a lot of the modern discourse around all these movies, these trilogies, especially in hindsight, is that you can say, "Oh, this isn't great, but I can laugh at this or something." I don't think there's a lot in the X-Men Last Stand that people really laugh about. They're just like, "Why? Why are these choices being made? Why is Dark Phoenix being adapted this way? Like, why are these characters mishandled, right?" So I mean, I think X-Men 1, there was a period of time where people are like, this is not that good. And then it kind of got a little bit of a bounce back. And 2 has always been pretty beloved. It's been like almost a template for modern superhero movies, especially these ensemble ones. But I don't. Yeah, I can't even say last. I feel like Last Stand has slightly improved reputation wise, but not by much.
Yeah, I feel like it improved a little bit more over the years when worse movies came out.
Like
And the
Apocalypse and yeah,
yeah, I think Apocalypse is better, but Dark Phoenix is awful, and then
god awful. Yeah.
and Origins is not very good either. So maybe, but yeah, I feel like Spider-Man it's all about memes. We haven't had too many movies that get the memes that the prequels of the Spider-Man trilogy do, and really, it's because of this generation, right? Those movies, Phantom Menace, 1999, Spider-Man 1, 2000. You know, it just was it built on itself for 2002, 2004, 2007, 99, 2002, and 2005. It's perfect for our generation.
Yeah.
So scrolling down now, because I know yours got lost in the shuffle there, Colton. So scrolling back down to Batasai the Manslayer says, "Hey, thanks for joining us again, Batasai. It's been a minute since we've seen you in one of these streams. Hope you're doing all right." Says, "Hey guys, I used to watch the movies frame by frame to identify every species and background character. So many times amazed at the genius of Lucas and his story." Yeah, no, you're a man after my own heart there, Babsai. Really used to do that all the time, especially you get a new toy, right? And it's somebody you're like, I have never seen this person or this character or this creature in any movie ever. I've got to go find them where they are in the movie now from the shot that's on the back of the toy card. That's something I used to do for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing that is gone for sure, it's just that kids don't necessarily buy the same toys. Like now, it's almost like toys have pivoted to being collector items, so it's a little harder to justify the little Premic and all these newer versions of like the EU-esque characters like Wilbur Hood and all that. That are like, we got to make an entire like book level backstory to them and then make it something that kids will want to buy and all that. Like that was a little easier back in the day. Now, if you're gonna buy toys for your kids, I really doubt that you want to be like, oh, this third bit in the background of this case, like Campina, has this
Right.
incredible story, but I've never seen it on Disney Plus or anything. So why would I buy it or why would my kid buy it? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
a kind of a lost art, even if they were overdoing it a bit in EU at times, I still miss that sentiment of like everybody had a story and that's how big the galaxy
Right.
was.
Yeah, and I think part of that, well, there's two main reasons that people don't invest in excuse me, background character toys anymore. Is one, they're too damn expensive nowadays, and two is we seem to remake every single character, whether it's even from the EU or in
Yeah.
canon or in every movie. There's been so many versions of every character remade over and over and over again. Where when we used to get the new toy lines, most of it would focus on new types of toys, whether it was a character in a new outfit or it was a different character we ever seen before. It was one that tied into a new movie. Now we get so many of the same people over and over and over again, just in a new box, that I think that's kind of killed it to where like now people, like you were saying, if the grandma's going to buy you a toy, it's going to be Luke Skywalker, not Luleo Premic. Sorry to where were we? Uber Eats TV. We're talking about The Last Jedi, and just to kind of summarize the chat we were discussing. Um, basically, you know, we're both saying we've kind of agreed with this point since we started YouTube. Like the sequels are going to come back at some point in a major way. My worry is that in today's world of influencers and people telling you what to think, that maybe there's going to be a subset of the younger generation that truly do think they are the worst thing ever and never actually give them a shot because they're told that. Whereas when we're growing up with prequels, nobody told us to hate the prequels because online social media wasn't as prevalent. You had to be a part of these chat forums and stuff like that. And we weren't old enough to really be a part of that. So it's not till you get older when you're already firm in your convictions that you hear that people don't like the prequels. So it'll be interesting to see if that same thing happens for the sequels. If not, hopefully they do come back in a big way in like 10, 12 years.
Yeah, I mean, as we've been discussing, it's a little bit more complicated, right? And there is not just like the whole social media discussion that we've been having, but there is also the fact that there's a lot more visual medium content for Star Wars, right? Not necessarily gaming. Gaming has only started to make a little bit of resurgence since, and it used to be such a huge, crucial part of the prequel era for us. That's how we, in some ways, experienced the original trilogy and a lot of these EUS stories, right? We had a lot of connections through that because of those games. But for visual content, it was just the trilogy, it was the Clone Wars, and then '03 Clone Wars, and then some random things here and there like Star Tours, right? I think one big thing that will kind of stop it from ever becoming like a massive thing for people, in terms of like change and like positivity in the same way the prequels have had, is that there's so many of these Disney Plus shows. There's also the whole Star Wars story films, like Rogue One and Solo, which are both well received, but one definitely a lot more than the other, and definitely has a lot more of a better response because of kind of fixing and retconning a flaw of the Death Star, right? So that's always going to be there. There's going to be kids who, in some ways, grew up with the Mandalorian instead of the sequels
Yeah.
too. So there's like that almost half generation after after the sequels, or like at the end of the sequel era, that kids were jumping into, and especially with the fact that movies are not as dominant in the theaters as they used to be when we were growing up. Like, we're probably the last golden age for like movie trilogies and franchise. You can say MCU, maybe as like the final one with Endgame, but still, streaming services have become such an important place for almost movie level quality storytelling that a lot of times these movies are just adapted into like mini series and fully told stories over there. It's not always the best format, but I think that's also gonna hurt it because there hasn't been like a period of like, let's just take a break or do something that's a little bit more low key with this era, and then
Right.
in 10, 15 years things will get like well received again. It's like we were like, no, 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 we have to flesh out this 30 years and continue pumping shows. And like, I'm not gonna complain about that. I'd take that any day over just like the late 2000s of like it's just Clone Wars and like a novel here and there about something like 70 years in the future of Star Wars, with Luke Skywalker still somehow the most important person of the galaxy, right? I prefer what we're getting now, even if it's not always hitting the same high quality notes as like some of those more sparsed out releases. But yeah, I don't know if kids will always come around to it. And that combined with the social media, with the people who are getting fed new content and so much of it that they can continue to hate on or find some flaws about and never have like a break from, that cycle doesn't end in the same way as like how it was for us as prequel kids, where eventually people are like, we don't care anymore. Like Revenge of the Sith, in some ways, people didn't care anymore by 2005, the same way that they cared back in 1997 through 99 with special editions coming out of the original trilogy and all the hype around that. So I think that combination is going to limit how great that, the res- resurgence of the sequels will be. Hopefully, New Jedi Order and stuff being told in between there. Again, I've been clamoring for sure on this channel. Let's get a Clone Wars esque show for that 1 year between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. Finally get to see Palpatine's address be told in anything but Fortnite. I think once we get some of those obvious fixes out of the way, once we kind of elongate this era instead of just being the trilogy, it will get better. But I think some people, and with the algorithms of today, they're never going to be like returned to the light, or people will be stuck in the dark, or however you want to look at it. It's just the nature of how content is made now.
Travis says, speaking for myself, the theater experience for The Force Awakens and Last Jedi were overwhelmingly positive. People were clapping and cheering even on the third watch. Social media changed it for the worse. I completely agree with both Force Awakens and Last Jedi. Force Awakens way more so. Force Awakens, first time I went, people were cheering at everything. It was Millennium Falcon showed up for the first time. When Han and Chewie showed up, when Leia showed up, when 3PO showed up, Luke, everything people were cheering for. When Rey pulled the lightsaber from Kylo Ren, my theater went crazy on opening night. So there was a big excitement around Force Awakens. Last Jedi, I don't remember as much cheering, but I remember there being like a lot of gasps and like audience interaction with the movie. Then Rise of Skywalker just felt flat. from the beginning. The marketing for that was not nearly put into it. The theater was like barely sold out when I went. It just was it was completely underwhelming for the everybody going to the Rise of Skywalker. And I always had the rule that I would never look at critic reviews before I saw a Star Wars movie. So I didn't even know it was not doing well on Rotten Tomatoes and stuff like that. But it just seemed like people were not interested. And then, there are the occasional cheers, and everybody cheers when the movie ends. But yeah, I do think in general the response was pretty positive for The Force Awakens when it first came out.
It was, it was, but it's almost becoming ancient history now with how many releases past we've gotten, right? Just until we get movies from Star Wars again, I don't know how much we can really judge how strong Star Wars movies will be received or if they'll ever get that same sort of turnaround that we got to experience with the prequels.
Travis, that's a pretty funny comment. Says Eddie Murphy has a bit about finishing when you finish pooping, you flush the toilet, and one chunk comes back. That's Mike Zero. I've unrecommended and blocked it so many times, but he keeps showing up. Um, you know, yeah, that's pretty accurate. Uh, um,
Can't add anything better than that.
Also says with Rise of Skywalker saw it at 9:30, which means it didn't start until 10, having to be at work at 5 a.m. the next day. So it was miserable. Rise was the only one I hated, but it was seeing people react to it on YouTube and get emotional during moments I thought were dumb that made me appreciate it and make peace with it. I do love how the old expanded universe had the characters in the late 70s, but kept writing them and like they were 20. Okay, that was a different comment, but yeah, I never hated Rise of Skywalker leaving it, but I was very mixed when I first saw it. Like out of all of them, there were things in Last Jedi I didn't love. There were moments in Force Awakens I didn't love, but overall, I think I left Force Awakens being like, I really enjoyed that movie. There are a couple things didn't work for me. I really enjoyed it, and then the second time I saw it, loved it. Right, Last Jedi, I left going, I don't even know what I feel about that movie. Um, like there's so many crazy things in that. I really got to see it again to digest it. Rise of Skywalker was the one that I was like, man, I don't think that was a very good movie, but there were some cool scenes. Like, oh, I love Palpatine shooting lightning in the sky. You know how to get me. You guys know me on the channel. You know how to get me. Make Palpatine do some cool stuff. So that's why I felt leaving the movie, especially because like a lot of the cool scenes, if you want to say that, are at the end of the Rise of Skywalker. So yeah, I left the Rise of Skywalker kind of like high on those scenes, but pretty low on the movie overall, the structure. But then, seeing them over and over and over again makes you think less about the flaws when you're enjoying the experience in the theater.
Yeah, I remember The Force Awakens just very happy. The Last Jedi, I do remember walking out of it with some of my friends. I was like, yeah, no, I thought that was pretty good, but like I was like, I need to think about it, right? That I feel like that's what everyone had for a second. I need to think about what I just saw, and what does that really mean in these days? It means that you go online to see what other people thought about it. So if there's something I've learned from The Last Jedi, is just let me think about it for a while before, and when I'm still like very susceptible to other people's opinions or hatred or absolute love for something, all right, let me take some time before I go online because yeah, like you guys are saying in the chat, I went online. I was on Reddit r/Star Wars Leaks, which I usually go because I find that they have pretty balanced discussion compared to like just the main subreddit, um, Twitter, Facebook, like yeah, like even there where it's still pretty grounded, people are just like, what is going on? It's like hellfire for a couple of days. And I think I would never do that again. So by the time The Rise of Skywalker came out, like I'd kind of already known some plot points. And of the two of us, I do definitely almost have this like need to hear about what's going on with Star Wars before I see it. I guess
Yeah,
some of it is from
yeah,
like
totally.
I get it. Like it's filmmaking. I sometimes appreciate getting a structure in place before I see the thing and just see how it's played out. But like I think in a strange way, what I'd read about the Rise of Skywalker, and I at that point with the Last Jedi and the Rise of Skywalker both, I made sure like to unsub for like the week before so I don't get any like visual spoilers or anything. But for the Rise of Skywalker, from what I had remembered, like there were things of like entire plot lines were leaked by Burger King in Germany. There were just some crazy things happening, and I was like, I don't know what to expect from this film, but I thought it was going to be pretty good, which I think in some ways led to me having a bit of a better like response to the film as a whole, because I was like, I'm gonna have Korean barbecue with some friends. Someone messaged me and it's like, I heard this movie shit, and I'm like, I'm not gonna say that. I just heard it's just very like it does things a little too far and then kind of backpedals a lot, and then it's just safe in a lot of ways. It just seems like a prequel movie to me, reception wise. And then I watched it with my friends, and we all were like laughing about a lot of the dumb stuff. But I was surprised to see how many people actually enjoyed it. Right within like a week, it was just like, oh my god, everyone hates it. The Last Jedi lovers hate it. The Last Jedi haters hate it. The Force Awakens sequel trilogy, everyone hates it, right? But in that moment, I was like, I've avoided the discussions. I've avoided taking everyone's immediate opinion, and it sat better for me in that way. So it is an interesting thing to feel how it's changed, how almost kind of isolating myself, even what I already had known coming into the movie, helped out my experience with The Rise of Skywalker versus The Last Jedi. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's it's almost ancient history now. I'm sure we're all both misremembering details at this point, because there's just been so many things with Star Wars that have come out that you're like, I don't even remember exactly what, we have it on the channel here, like how I felt about Book of Boba Fett's episode 1 or something, right? It's crazy how much we've covered.
Yeah, and it's hard to put yourself back into that headspace when you're watching Star Wars for the first time, because for me there's so many things that come across in every Star Wars movie outside of the original, for us the original 6, right? That one little thing can come across and you're like, that's not Star Wars. Like my red flag meter goes up off all the time when I'm watching anything Star Wars. But you have to kind of like suppress that a bit, because that's the ultra fan in you. Not that, if I was making a Star Wars movie, I would not suppress that, right? I would do nothing that would be setting off my feeling on what is Star Wars and what's not Star Wars, right? I would make it the way I'd want it to, but that might be Star Wars for somebody else, and it's just not Star Wars for me. So yeah, it's a tricky thing. But Rise was definitely like movies, when you know the score or you kind of know the general consensus before you watch them, it does help you like movies better if you're somebody who wants to like it, right? Like for me, that was Batman versus Superman. First time I saw it, I was like, that wasn't that bad, because I knew it was getting terrible reviews. And I was like, not that bad. Like I liked it. Um, I still like it for the most part. It's like a 2.5 out of 5, which is average. But Rise of Skywalker, I knew nothing. So when the movie starts and I felt like I was being jerked all over the place with the pacing, I was like, what the heck is going on? Like it really set my mind off, and it was hard to recover from that. But yeah, it's everybody has their first take on it. And then we have Colton Smith, who said, unrelated, but just saw Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Movie was awesome. CGI was amazing. Curious if you all have seen it yet. I have seen it, Colton, and I really liked it. I would say it's not as good as Dawn and War to me, but it's better than Rise, in my opinion, if you're just talking about the new ones. I actually have, so my typical plug, it's usually once a stream, I'll plug my other channel, which is called Legends Lore. You can look it up. It's linked to this channel. And if you would like to look up, I just posted a Planet of the Apes tier list that I did the other day. So you can check that out if you want to see my rankings of the movies. But I did really enjoy Kingdom. I thought it was way better than I was expecting.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to watching it, because I haven't seen any of like the modern Apes films. I haven't seen any Apes film, right? The closest I've ever gone to Planet of the Apes is like trailers, I think. And I used to see some of the trailers back in college for like War and stuff, especially. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna watch it now, but then I never got to. And I remember one of my earliest conversations with Liam was about War of the Planet of the Apes, but it was just in like passing. So I didn't really give it further thought. I was like, I thought the trailer was cool. Woody Harrelson's in this as like the villain or something. That was about it, right? I just randomly remember that. But yeah, one of my friends asked, and we're getting like a couple of our friends to get a little reunion going. and we haven't had one in a couple of years. So he's like, "Can we watch Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes?" I'm like, "Sure." And then I think Disney Plus or Hulu has it, the first three of them all on there. So I'm planning on watching them finally: Rise, Dawn, and War. So pretty excited. Plus, I'm a bit of a sucker for naming conventions like that because I'm a
Yeah.
fan of Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead. Right? Like I'm pretty excited to see these films, especially Dawn, because I've heard so many good things about it, and I'm a fan of what Matt Reeves was able to do in the Batman too. So
Yeah.
I can only assume that he kind of got into that position because of these films. So excited, and I've seen some things about Kingdom that apparently harken all the way back to the original films, which gets me pretty excited.
Kingdom is very good. I think, a Planet of the Apes is a great like comparison to Romero's Dead trilogy because, well, one, Night of the Living Dead came out the same year as the original Planet of the Apes, and so did 2001: A Space Odyssey. So it's kind of an interesting year for sci-fi and genre, but a lot of them very nihilistic genre movies, and a lot of what Romero I feel like was inspired to do with Dawn and eventually Day of the Dead. I feel like some of it might come from Planet of the Apes because Planet of the Apes, the next four, especially the next three after the original, are just crazy. Like the endings are all crazy. A lot of it is very dark and kind of disguised as these fun sci-fi movies. So
Yeah,
definitely worth a watch. Um, so where were we here? So we've gone for almost 2 hours. I guess we might as well just get close to 2 hours. We'll wrap it up around there. Little makeup for y'all for those who have stuck around since the technical issues. So sorry about that again. Again, it's an issue that there's really no fixing. It just happens, and it seems to be in the way we connect to YouTube through our streaming platform. And we're looking to change streaming platforms hopefully soon, but it's about finding one that works for our system. So,
definitely before Acolyte, we'll get that fixed. I think we haven't had this issue in a while. I managed to refresh on OBS, which is why I think our images disappeared for a second. But maybe that's what fixed the audio. I'm not sure. So maybe usually I've been checking the audio on these streams, guys, because I've been a bit wary about this time, and they got me. So yeah, always make sure to. And I said it, and it jinx. Oh man. Let's see if the audio improved by refreshing.
it's back. Yeah, I think it's back.
Yeah, okay. I guess it fixes it if I refresh it. Yeah, that's
Well, there you go. Now we found a fix for it finally.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, that is unreal, Jinx. Like Colton
Yeah,
said.
as I was talking, I was like, this is a fix. Yeah. So hopefully if that happens again before we make our transition to our new whatever our new platform is, we'll be able to be quicker on it. Just didn't notice the chat.
I think it was just testing us to make it's like, oh, you really think that's the fix? All right.
Uh,
But we have Victor, and Victor, I'm sorry, I do not know how to pronounce your last name. Sochi something. I will, not pronounce it to mess it up. So, but it says, I love the sequels. I don't care what anybody has to say. Call me a fake fan. I don't care. You're not a fake fan. And if you like anything that's related to Star Wars, you like Star Wars. So you're not a fake fan.
yeah.
But yeah, glad you like the sequels.
At this point, being a proud sequel fan, honestly, in some ways, if you really want to get pedantic with it, I'm like, I think you are a true fan because you're constantly barraged with sharing your opinion, just pointing out online, like, oh, I like this about the sequels, and you're gonna face a wall of people who are angry and mad at you, right? Sadly, I say this as a prequel fan and someone who grew up in the prequel era. A lot of them are from prequel kids who had the same thing with the original trilogy. So, we understand. We definitely on this channel try to be critical without, negating happiness that comes from being a Star Wars fan. So, yes, you are a Star Wars fan. Don't let anyone ever tell you that you're not. Enjoy what you do about Star Wars. Don't enjoy what you don't. It's a big, big galaxy for a reason.
And at this point too, like those people who there aren't too many of them left, and if there are, they don't really speak in public. But those people who are original trilogy only fans and that's it, like they don't read anything post original trilogy, they don't watch anything post original trilogy. Now they're actually in the minority in terms of amount of content that has come out, right? Like there's so much more post them that they are basically just saying, I am only a fan of three movies, like a Star Wars trilogy, and not necessarily a Star Wars broader scope fan, which is interesting. But I still hold by that anybody who likes anything to do with Star Wars is a Star Wars fan. So glad to have you on board, Victor. Where were we here? I think Skywalker's Academy said if they can find a way to bring back Ben Solo, I'd probably accept it fairly easily. I would too. There's a couple videos up on the channel about Ben Solo coming back. You can check those out if you haven't, but you probably have already. But it is something I feel like New Jedi Order hinges on, because I think having Ben back, that chemistry, that level of character weight to really grow character for the sequel trilogy. Because what we can't do in New Jedi Order is just be like, well, let's kill off Rey and Finn and Poe now and move on to the next set. Like we really got to develop some characters here. If that means doubling down on characters that people don't like, I think that's a better idea than killing them off in favor of new characters that we have to now try to get attached to again, right? Let's make these ones better. Yeah, it'll take a while for a lot of the internet to turn around on them, but I think that's the only way you can really move on and improve them. And it's also the only way you can kind of get that return on your investment in the sequel trilogy, which, as I've said before, it dominates so much of what Disney's done with Star Wars. The theme park rides, the theme park land, the once once existing Star Wars hotel, all of that was sequel themed. And so I always thought that was a mistake, to be honest. I like the idea of the live action role playing element, but then when they pulled back on that, I kind of wish they just made it like original trilogy Empire themed, right? Just because that's eternal. Everybody likes that. So why not go with the one thing that everybody likes? They really bet hard on the sequels, and so I don't think they're going to fold on that bet. They're going to try to get as much back on it as they can. So it will be something they double down on, and in that way, I really hope Ben Solo coming back is part of that. They are a dyad in the Force. We don't necessarily know what that really entails. It obviously has the power to create life with Palpatine. So it could be something you could get around and write new lore. I don't want them to go too crazy with like what the Force can do, but if there's a way or a place or like, embracing dark powers or something like that that can make Ben Solo come back to life, I think that would be a really interesting plot point for Rey to go through, especially because Ben is one of the more liked parts of the sequels. Not everybody likes him. We've seen that plenty in our tournaments, people not liking Ben. But I think for the general audience, Ben is one of the more liked characters. So bringing him back just seems very obvious.
Yeah, and even in the poll that we had today, right? Or yesterday, I don't remember exactly when it came out, but he's paired up against Jaina Solo. If you haven't checked it out, we're saying this character tournament that we're going on in our community poll. He other unlike some of the other sequel characters who have like kind of settled in the 20s or something, and this also includes see results because some people just want to see what people's opinions are on these characters against Jaina Solo, who has one of the longest running stories in the EU. He somehow managed to crawl back and get a little bit more percentage wise. He's like in the upper 30s. I think he might have almost touched the low 40s, which for a character of that reputation is pretty impressive. So, yeah, there is a lot of love for him, especially he is considered the best part of the sequels, and rightfully so, because Adam Driver's fantastic. But whatever he's been given in all three of the films. But yeah, I'm not sure if like what the diet will do, right? Like the idea is that he's given up his entire life force to revitalize, to revive a dead Daisy Ridley's Ray, right? So can he come back? Sure. Could it be like the microbiotic world, like we mentioned before? Maybe. Maybe he's like inside her and they
Yeah.
can swap out places or do something, right? Because I think it would be a little cheap if we do the same thing as Anakin, just getting like a Sparks Notes version of how to become a Force ghost immediately after Return of the Jedi, right? And that too, he gets to look like how he did before he got chopped up on Mustafar. So I would hope that Ben Solo doesn't get to have that same route. He gets to have something interesting that would allow him to still have at least a couple more, appearances within the Star Wars universe, even if he's not, fully explored in another movie or something, but at least gets like a significant role in one. Let a TV show or something else expand it out further.
Yeah, and that would be something interesting, especially because for some God knows what reason they didn't include Ben Solo at the end of the Rise of Skywalker with Luke and Leia. So by not doing that, now you can give kind of a reason, right? You can really explore what his struggle is in the Force, because he disappears, his body disappears. So in some way, he's transformed into the living Force. We kind of do that retcon, kind of like they've done with Anakin, in like from a certain point of view, Return of the Jedi and stuff like that, where you can maybe give a reason why his soul was grappling basically in the Force, and why he can't really manifest himself yet, but he was still able to transform into the Force. I think that would be something interesting. My theory has always been that he's kind of inside her. She can hear his thoughts, trying to find a way for him to kind of be pulled out in some capacity, right? So yeah, hopefully we get something about that soon. So we've reached the 2 hour mark, I guess, because we have one more technical issue. Maybe we'll go about 5 more minutes. So Skywalker's Academy, or no, Travis Mitchell says, I wrote a really crappy outline for 10 to 12 and I figured out a few ways to bring him back, but if it happened in the films, I see it as a voice. Yeah, kind of like we just talked about. Skywalker's Academy said I have a bunch of ideas in Google Drive. Travis says, honestly, expecting Kellern Beck to show up in a one-off in Bad Batch, helping him transport Grogu, but I'm excited to see him again. And yeah, that would have been cool to see Kellern Beck. It's kind of weird, that would have been a good Tales of the Empire series or Tales of the Jedi series. Surprised they haven't done that. I feel like they've got to have grand plans for Kellern, right? Like, why even bring him up? Obviously, just the Ahmed Best cameo, but like, why set that plot line forward and never touch it again? They've got to have some type of plan for this character or for this arc in the future. It definitely wasn't like a soft like a soft pilot either, because who's going to greenlight a show about Ahmed Best as a Jedi before anybody's seen it, right? Like, that's not going to happen. It's going to need this fan support, and I don't think just one scene is really going to have done it. So they need to double down on it and tell the rest of that story. It's coming somewhere, but it's weird that they haven't tackled it yet.
Yeah, I feel like after seeing Bad Batch Season 3 with Ventress's one episode, I almost would have preferred Kellern with Grogu because at least there's a connection to Project Necromancer. But there also was a big emphasis on not giving all the details away for that. They only kind of like showed it off at the very beginning of the season anyways. So yeah, it would have been interesting if like Omega and Grogu had a moment. It's like, oh, I'm some stabilizer, you're some massive source of midichlorians. We should really not be here together, and then be like, all right, it's time to leave. We both figure out some things about each other that, or at least through Kellern, that should not be further explored because we both want peace in our lives. And then that would have been the episode, right? I would have appreciated that. I'm not really held up on that, right? I think Bad Batch handled itself as a very, very Bad Batch focused show by the end. It did enough that I needed out of in its finale with Tantus and all that, while still leaving up some crumbs that Thrawn and everyone else can pick up later in the New Republic era, later Empire era for sure. So yeah, I mean, I do understand that feeling of like Beck, like first he was on a game show for Star Wars before he became a full character. So it's like, why do that, right? Why make this such an important part of Grogu's backstory? We don't know yet, but I don't think he's done. I don't know if we'll necessarily get more live action. I could definitely see like a Tales episode or something, kind of flesh it out because Grogu's just that popular anyways. And this is a good way for him to become a little bit more of a notable Jedi without necessarily having to have like Clone Wars-esque arcs and shows and length of exploration. But who knows?
And that's another way too, just kind of off the top of my head, that you can bring all these iconic elements of Star Wars like the Force into the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, is if, you made a lot of it about retracing Grogu's history, like Din trying to figure out, okay, where'd you come from? What makes you important? How'd you get here? A lot of that could be interesting. You could bring in Luke that way. You could bring in Kellern Beck. You could bring in Ahsoka that way to kind of unite the Mandalorian world. It could be something that they could do. Not necessarily the way I want them to take the story, but it could be something they could do if they want to try to hit on every single, iconic piece of Star Wars, whether it's lightsabers and the Force, or whether it's New Republic and Empire or Mandalorians. That would be a way to unite all of it. But that's going to wrap it up for this stream. Thank you, everybody, for watching and for staying with us through some of the technical issues. If you're watching on replay, we'll have edited them out, so you won't even see them. But thanks for sticking with us. It seems like, based on my poll that I put up in the chat about 30 minutes ago, so it wasn't necessarily everybody who's joined us tonight, but Tuesday is the day that a lot of people prefer, and we definitely got a big boost in terms of conversation here tonight, almost so much that we had a hard time getting to the few topics we had. So we really love that, and we appreciate when you guys comment along. That is the most fun part of these lives. So let's plan on Tuesday for next week as of now, and we'll let you know if something changes. But it also is kind of based on whatever the news of the week is. So we'll see, but let's kind of plan on that, guys. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you to Skywalker's Academy, who joined our membership program. Again, you guys can join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs if you're interested. And then also Travis Mitchell for his super chat. We greatly appreciate all of your support for the channel and your constant commenting and discussing things with us. Always really appreciated. Again, things you can stay tuned for on the channel. My Dark Time show pitch that you guys have heard a bunch of times on the stream, the full pitch coming out on, I believe it'll be Thursday. The video will drop. But for Patreon and membership members, you can see it tomorrow. That will drop on Thursday, and then you will get to see my first part, the Old Republic and Dawn of the Jedi era of the Star Wars Legends complete timeline. I don't think anybody has really done that on YouTube yet. I know Star Wars Explained has done like a encapsulation of everything that's happened in Legends. I don't think anybody's done a full complete timeline of every single short story, promotional material, comic book, movie, show, everything that you can possibly consume for Star Wars on YouTube. So keep an eye out for that. That will be coming in parts, 8 parts, starting with Dawn of the Jedi and the Old Republic era. If you're interested, check that out. And then we have some other videos coming out next week as well. So stay tuned for all of that. Like we mentioned earlier, we have our character tournament, which is slowly creeping along, but a lot of you guys have enjoyed voting in it and discussing. So that's going to be a much longer tournament than we've ever done. But that is slowly creeping along. We've had a lot of marquee matchups this week. So if you want to check that out, vote for your favorite characters in Star Wars and kind of comment and battle in the comments why they're your favorite. Feel free to do so over there. And we do have shorts coming out every single week, usually 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I might get back to the every other day format. We'll see how it's shaking out, but mostly Monday, Wednesday, and Friday has worked for us. So keep an eye on shorts as well. Thank you so much for watching this stream, everybody, and we'll see you all next week for the next one. Good night.